Yeah, I rather regret the time got away that I rather regret the lack of opportunity to address the specifics of the domestic abuse bill that is currently going through Parliament. I know that you wanted to ask me about some of the potential limitations of it, and I want to draw attention in the time that I've got to a couple of features of the bill. First, I'll start by emphasising some of the positive features. Actually, many of the crimes it covers have already been indictable offences in the UK, but I think 78% of domestic abuse-related crimes over the last statistical year were violent offences against a person, but that's covered by the Violent Offences Against a Person Act of 1861, which is slightly outdated, complex piece of legislation. So the domestic abuse bill is a good way of increasing awareness. It brings the offences together. Most importantly, it reforms some aspects of the family court system. In particular, and it is very significant, is that it now allows victims appearing before the family court to have special measures, meaning that they don't have to be interviewed by the perpetrator, which can currently happen. A victim can request special measures, but that's a matter of discretion to the judge. So there was a well-known case where the victim repeatedly requested special measures so that she wouldn't have to be interviewed by the perpetrator of abuse, and the judge dismissed this because he decided it would upset what he called the feng shui of his courtroom, and he insisted that both victim and perpetrator sat next to each other on the bench in front of him, and the perpetrator was able to cross-examine the victim. So now special measures will be put in place that it will include things that already happen in the criminal courts. Victims will be able to have separate waiting rooms. They won't have to be cross-examined by the perpetrator. So that's a very important step forward. If I can just, I've got time, I think I can move on to the next important possible, I think, game changer, and that's that the bill will create a domestic abuse commissioner, and they will be in charge of convening a multidisciplinary panel that will overview measures being taken to address domestic abuse. Now, this could, how that would work in practice, it is not clear. It would depend upon funding, upon multi-agency support, but again, it's a good step forward. Now, I want to address some of the limitations of the bill. Firstly, and this one is a bit of a mixed bag. Initially, it sounds positive, but local authorities will be placed under a legal obligation to provide and monitor domestic abuse support provisions. Now, this will require funding, obviously. It's not just a matter of will, it requires the capacity to put it into action. And given the context in which this is coming about, in decades of austerity have left refuge shelters underfunded. Last year, 64% of refuge referrals were declined. And against that backdrop, there's concern that this new obligation will actually cause competition as it were in the sector, and remove funding, divert resources from community-based support to accommodation-based support, which, whilst that's essential, especially given in light of what we've talked about in the matter of the coercive control and so on, I think you can see that the importance of community-based intervention. And at the moment, we have independent domestic abuse advisors that fulfill that role. They support abusers within their own homes and communities. There's strong evidence that if they work within a hospital setting, then it will have a big impact on long-term well-being and health. There isn't a specific, as it were, ring fencing for those services, and I think that is probably needed. And finally, I want to address something that is actually really not talked about as a feature of this bill, and I think it problematic because it in a sense detracts from the work and advocacy and importance of what it's trying to achieve. But under Part 5, there is a provision that will it will introduce a 3-year pilot study in which offenders will be given lie detector polygraph testing. Now, as it happens, polygraph testing is being used by police forces across the country, but polygraphs are not admissible as evidence in court. And there are decades of research showing that it is lacks scientific credibility. They can be faked, and this, in the context of the UK justice legal system as a whole, it's a really big change. It has lie detecting polygraphy is already in use. It's used in cases mainly for sexual abuses, and the police have used it to extract further testimony. It can encourage a suspect to give up information. So I think you can see that what we're seeing here is we've been talking about coercive control, and why that should be addressed at a society level, a matter of, as it were, integrity between humans in their relationships, and yet now we are talking about using coercive measures against the perpetrators. Now, some might see that as a sort of karmic justice, but one has to ask if we're going to actually get to the root of domestic abuse in society, um, it, which at its heart is a human rights issue. It's something that removes human liberty. It prevents victims from being full participants in our society, economically, within their families, within their communities. It carries huge costs, not just to the victims, but to our whole nation. So one has to ask if using introducing coercive measures in this bill through lie detection tests, it's really going to further that agenda, especially as we already have seen an uptick in say what we might call the alt-right movement of extreme misogyny, attacks against women trying to highlight abuse issues, and so on and so forth. You know, is this actually where we want to go? Is this progress? I'm not convinced it is. No one's really been talking about it. I think that possibly because everyone's so keen to get this bill through, it's been delayed. It was delayed by Brexit. It's delayed by elections. It's been going on for a couple of years. So, you know. So I see that as quite a big negative. And actually, I know I'm going over time, but finally, one thing that this bill does, whilst it employs the same definition that's been used in policy guidelines for several years now, in its definition of domestic abuse as a crime, the policy guidelines used to distinctly specify that it was a pattern of behaviour. That is multiple incidents, not just a single event. And the new bill has changed that definition to it can just be a single incident. Now, that presents, I would say, prospects and challenges. Data from prosecutions of domestic abuse crime shows that more than any other comparable crimes with violence against a person, prosecutions fail because of evidential issues. And by that, they mean that the victims have withdrawn their support. They don't want to present evidence. They don't wish to support the prosecution. In fact, that's no reason for a prosecution not to go ahead. But what we have seen in what the statistics show is that I had a little slide for this actually. Is that in domestic abuse cases, more than in other cases, prosecutions are dropped because of lack of victim willingness to participate in the proceedings. And one can understand why they might be hesitant, particularly as some of the worst cases of abuse, of features of abuse, is that it's ongoing. It doesn't just happen in the home. It happens after a woman, a victim, has left the home. Single, divorced people, for example, can suffer some of the worst abuse. So why did this backtracking to a single incident, why could that be negative? One might think intuitively that it would make it easier for intensive evidence gathering, but why I think we should be cautious about it is that in the existing context, as I explained earlier, most incidents of abuse are minor. A push, a slap, they're not significant in terms of criminal justice or medical point of view. It's the cumulative effect that is key. It is what happens over years, and bearing in mind that it takes many victims years before they come forward, and I don't think awareness of that fact should be lost, because it is essential for frontline workers when they first responders, for example, at a scene, or neighbours, the community, to understand that what they see is the product of years of cumulative minor incidents that have undermined a person, that have controlled a person, that have made them compliant to a certain extent through fear, and the visible signs of physical violence are not necessarily there, you know,